Okay, hi everyone. I feel like it's pretty fitting to go after that last presentation. I feel like a lot of gaps definitely kind of get answered. But I'm Luke, I'm from Western University, and today I'm presenting Passing Lane Occlusion Index, or PLOI. And that's a geometric framework for measuring preventative defensive positioning in women's soccer. And the one-line idea is actually pretty simple. So a lot of elite defending never actually shows up in the box score because the best defenders actually solve problems before the pass is even open. So over the next 7-ish minutes, I'll cover what problem PLOI targets, how the metric works, what we found empirically, and then why that matters for both scouting and coaching. So I kind of want to start with a fun little quote that I like. If I have to make a tackle, then I've already made a mistake, from the famous Paolo Maldini. And that's really the gap, is that most defensive event stats, tackles, interceptions, blocks, are fundamentally reactive, and they only record what happened after the opponent already found a threat. But a huge share of good defending is in that invisible stuff, the positioning that makes a ball carrier look up, hesitate, and choose the safe option, because the dangerous lane is quietly gone. So the core question that I pose to you is, how much of the valuable passing space is this defender taking away right now? And that's what PLOI is built to quantify. So PLOI is a frame-by-frame pipeline with 3 moving pieces. First, we build the passing lanes, then model the defender reach, and then score what that overlap is. So step 1 of that passing lane construction is, for every frame where a team has settled possession, we then take the ball carrier and generate potential passing corridors to each plausible teammate. And then we don't necessarily treat these lanes as hairline segments. They're polygons with a width that expands over distance. So modeled that starting with a 2-meter width and then incremented by 0.05 times the distance. And then that's kind of meant to reflect the real variance in passing trajectories over longer distances. Also, potential receiver isn't literally everyone. I filtered out players far behind the ball by more than 5 meters, players beyond 60 meters, and players blocked by a teammate within 1 meter of the lane line of sight, because we're modeling pros who obviously ideally know who they're passing to. And then step 2 would be that defender influence modeling. So each defender then gets a velocity-oriented ellipse, basically where you could realistically affect space within that next moment. And the key parameters here are kind of that reaction time of half a second, a stationary reach of 1.5 meters, and then a cap speed bonus around 3 meters. And then the ellipse stretches more along that movement vector than sideways, because obviously you could run forward faster than you can left or right. And then step 3 would be that occlusion and then adding on a value. So then we'd compute how much of the lane polygon is covered by that ellipse, and you get an intersection to area ratio. And then you weigh that by how dangerous that pass would be using an expected threat model. So blocking a through ball would count more than blocking a harmless recycle pass. And then concretely, pass value comes from a 16:12 XT grid trained on 2021 to 2024 NWSL, WSL data. And then we take the delta XT from the ball carrier to the receiver, flooring all negatives at 0. And then one more important but a little bit nerdy tidbit is that each defender gets independent credit for their occlusion. So even if the team's occlusion would sum pass 100% on a given lane, that's pretty intentional, because we're measuring capability to deny the pass, not really allocating a single team share. So what does PLOI actually measure? Empirically, it's almost uncorrelated with traditional defensive actions, so tackles, interceptions, and blocks. And on the slide, you could really see the correlations close to 0. And that's kind of the key insight, is that PLOI is orthogonal to ball winning, that players who are great at stepping in and winning the ball are often not the same players who prevent the pass from being attempted in the first place. So now let's talk scale and what good actually looks like. So this was tested focusing on 140 defenders who played at least 450 minutes. And across those defenders, the average PLOI per 90 is about 0.52, and an elite threshold is over 0.7. And then the positional nuance shows up in a way that feels pretty intuitive. So center backs have the highest mean PLOI because they sit obviously in the most valuable central lanes against through balls. And so once you have ploy and traditional defensive actions together, you could actually see types of defenders instead of one blended defense rating. So I used some k-means clustering over ploy plus tackles, interceptions, and blocks, and then we kind of had 5 archetypes emerge. So the one that I care most about in this presentation is lane deniers, about 18% of defenders that had high ploy and then low event counts. And that's exactly the kind of player that standard event-based scouting models might miss. So kind of the next question would be, does this actually matter at a team level? And the answer is yes. So team level ploy correlates with defensive outcomes, and then higher ploy is associated with lower XG, and lower XG conceded, and then lower pass completions allowed. And then reliability-wise, ploy behaves like a real trait, not just noise. So split half stability is around 0.72, meaning that defenders who score well in the first half of the season tend to keep scoring well across the entire season. Okay, so now that we know what ploy is and that it's good, what do you actually do with it? So I think we're kind of making the point directly in this slide. So lane deniers are often statistically invisible in standard event-based scouting. So if you're mostly looking at just tackles, interceptions, and blocks, then the defender whose main value is preventing the pass from ever being attempted can look quiet because their contribution is literally that nothing happened. And what ploy gives you is a way to measure that invisible value. And then once you can measure it, you can use it in 2 practical ways, coaching and recruiting. So on the coaching side, I think I go a little bit deeper on the paper on like pressing efficiency. So a team that can concede few shots and still allow easy progression through the midfield, ploy can actually flag that problem by showing you that your midfield lanes aren't being occluded consistently. So it becomes a diagnostic tool for structure rather than just an individual player rating. And then the second coaching application is compactness ploy. So ploy normalized by the size of your defensive shape. This is especially useful for maybe low block teams where you might concede territory by design, but can still be extremely effective if your compact block denies central progression at a high rate per square meter. And then at the recruiting level, the system fit pitch is actually pretty straightforward. So if you're on a high press system, you maybe want to target defenders with high occlusion in advanced zones. And if you're a low block system, you maybe want to target lane deniers or defenders with very strong compactness efficiency, players who make those dangerous central passes disappear, even when they might not be piling up tackles. So overall, this is kind of where the metric turns into an actual usable tool. It helps you surface undervalued player types, diagnose team structure, and recruit to your tactical identity. So kind of just to close, ploy is a way to measure the defensive skill Maldini was pointing at, the intelligence of solving threats early. It uses tracking data to model passing corridors, defender reachability, and the value of what's denied. And it produces a metric that's distinct from traditional actions, stable over time, and meaningfully related to learn defensive outcomes. Thank you. Shout out to Skill Corner and Scott and the ASI team, and more than happy to field any questions.